and welcome to EWTN Pro-Life Weekly, your weekly dose of the top pro-life news and issues, all from a Catholic perspective. I am your host, Catherine Hadro, in our Washington, D.C. studio. Thank you for joining us. In this week's show, a former Planned Parenthood director tells us how she views the abortion giant today. We speak out against extreme abortion remarks from Democratic presidential candidates on the campaign trail. And this.
The only good parent to a Planned Parenthood is a parent who believes the same ideology that Planned Parenthood believes.
She used to volunteer for Planned Parenthood and tells us what we need to know about their sexual education program. But first, our top story, pro-life U.S. representatives kick off their first week back in Congress with a hearing on the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act.
Signing the Born Alive Act petition is the simplest choice that any member of Congress can make. The tragedy of infanticide across our country requires serious and effective legal safeguards.
House Minority Whip Steve Scalise, Missouri Representative Ann Wagner, in coordination with the Pro-Life Caucus, held a hearing Tuesday on the Born Alive Act, a bill which would require medical care for babies who survive abortions. The minority hearing included testimonies from pro-life medical experts, including former abortionist turned pro-lifer Dr. Kathy Altman and Jill Stanek, a nurse who witnessed babies left to die. This hearing comes as Congress returns to D.C. following the August recess. In April, Scalise filed a discharge petition for the Born Alive bill. This is a tactic to bypass Democratic leadership, which has already blocked over 80 requests for a vote. And joining us now from Capitol Hill is House Minority Whip Steve Scalise of Louisiana himself. Welcome back to the show.
Catherine, good to be back with you.
You co-chaired this Born Alive hearing. What do you see as the next step here? Your discharge petition on the Born Alive bill has not yet reached the necessary 218 signatures to force a House floor vote on this bill.
And Catherine, that's exactly our objective, is to keep shining light on this issue, letting people know that right now babies who are born alive outside the womb do not have federal protection. And yet most people would recognize that it's murder if you kill that baby. And yet in some states like New York, it's legal and happening. We can't let it happen. And so having this hearing to emphasize that we need to have congressional action, and Speaker Pelosi won't let the bill come to the floor. Like you said, the only method we have right now to get it to the floor is a discharge petition, which means 218 members of Congress need to sign on. And that means if somebody back home asks their member of Congress, have you signed the discharge petition to protect babies who are born alive outside the womb? That's the ultimate test, and our objective is to get that necessary 218 signatures, bring the bill to the floor where it will pass.
As you mentioned, you do need more signatures from Democrats. Do you see any potential for that?
There is potential to get more Democrat signatures because think about this. There are many members of Congress today, Democrat members, who ran saying that they were pro-life and yet haven't signed this discharge petition. So it's hard to go back home and claim you're pro-life when up in Washington, the things that you need to do to actually defend life, and we're talking here about a baby who's born alive outside the womb. If you won't sign that discharge petition, it's real hard to go back home and claim you're pro-life when you're not defending life here in Washington where it matters most.
There are a lot of Americans who don't believe the Born Alive bill is even necessary because they think it is already illegal to allow babies to die. Can you clarify that?
I can absolutely clarify it. In fact, we had testimony from people, a powerful testimony, doctors and nurses who have seen this actually happen, talked about how babies have been born alive as the result of a failed abortion and were killed. And in many states, it's still not considered murder. So they need federal protection. Those babies need federal protection to make it clear that if a baby is born alive outside the womb, even if it's an attempted abortion where the baby was born alive, that baby should get full protection. So people who try to claim it doesn't happen are ignoring the facts. And again, medical doctors came and testified about what's going on out there in the real world and why this bill is so necessary.
And finally, what is your message to your fellow Catholic and fellow member of Congress, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, about this specific bill and the fact she consistently blocks a vote on it?
My message is very clear. Speaker Pelosi should bring the Born Alive bill to the floor today. It would pass overwhelmingly, but she refuses to do it because she doesn't want it to pass. And so our only option right now is to get a discharge petition, meaning 218 members of Congress have to sign on. All those people who say that they're pro-life and have not signed on to this discharge petition need to sign it so that we can actually defend life, not in our talk back home in our districts, but in reality, in the law here in Washington, where those babies don't have protection and deserve to have that full protection.
House Minority Whip Steve Scalise of Louisiana, thank you for your leadership.
Thank you. Great being back with you.
I have learned that babies save us if we will have the courage to consistently save them.
And joining us now is Dr. Robyn Pierucci, an associate scholar at the Charlotte Lozier Institute and a neonatologist who testified at the Born Alive hearing. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
You testified at this week's Born Alive hearing. What was your message to the lawmakers?
It really was all about making the babies more human, especially when they're born prematurely. It's easy to call them fetal and other names that obscure. No, they're just real people.
And as a practicing neonatologist, what are the standards of care for premature babies specifically?
Well, the standard of care is to evaluate every individual. You know, just like a cancer patient, not all cancer is the same in all people. The same kind of thing. There's different degrees of prematurity, and different babies are affected differently. So when you evaluate each one, there is a standard resuscitation that we go through, NRP, Neonatal Resuscitation Program. It's a national program, and it gives us the guidelines of how to resuscitate each baby at each individual gestational age.
And is that standard of care the same for babies who survive abortions?
You know, it's one of those moments of I don't know what I don't know. If you never are called to that delivery, you never get to care for them. I suspect no one has ever thought of, well, if their intent was to abort the baby, it's not going to cross their mind that they should have to rescue the baby if they failed in their first attempt.
So as a medical doctor, what is it you want people to know about this Born Alive legislation?
I hope this gives perhaps the nurses who might work at the abortion clinic the strength, because now it would be a law. If the baby is born alive, you have to call for help.
Right, absolutely. And finally, I know in your testimony you had this beautiful line about how it was your line of work that brought you to the life issue and to be pro-life.
Yeah. As a convert to Catholicism, even at the time of my conversion, it was something I still struggled with because I grew up in a household where very good people talked about being pro-abortion. It was all very cerebral. And then I saw these babies and I got to care for them. And like I said, they're real. They're not tissue. They're not sort of maybe people. They're fully human beings with these perfect little souls that look at you.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing your insight with us and for your testimony, Dr. Robyn Pierucci of the Charlotte Lozier Institute. Thank you.
Thanks.
As we've reported, pro-life representatives held a minority House hearing this week on the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act. The bill would require infants who survive botched abortion procedures receive necessary medical care. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Democratic leadership have refused over 80 requests for unanimous consent on this legislation. So lawmakers led by House Minority Whip Steve Scalise have filed a discharge petition that would force a vote on this bill. The petition needs 17 more signatures, and that brings us to this week's call to action. Go to ProLifeWeekly.com to tell your U.S. representative to sign the discharge petition on the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act. When you get to our website, ProLifeWeekly.com, you will be able to type in your information so we can tailor the message to be for your specific lawmaker. Then you can send the message straight to them. Again, the Born Alive bill should be a common sense law. Any infant who is born alive deserves care and protection. The discharge petition only needs 17 more U.S. representatives to sign it before a vote on Born Alive will be forced on the floor. Make sure to speak up and tell your representative to sign the petition by going to ProLifeWeekly.com. Turning now to our next segment, we recently spoke with a former Planned Parenthood director who won $3 million for being wrongfully terminated from the abortion business. Mayra Rodriguez worked at Planned Parenthood for 17 years and was even named Employee of the Year in 2016 until she claims she was unfairly dismissed for raising legal and ethical breaches in 2017. An Arizona jury unanimously sided with Rodriguez just last month, 2 years after she was fired. And last week, Rodriguez told us about the breaches she witnessed during her time at Planned Parenthood. In part 2 of our interview, Rodriguez opens up about her opinions on the abortion business today. I've seen pro-lifers draw parallels to your story and Abby Johnson's, a prominent pro-life leader who also previously directed a Planned Parenthood and also was named Employee of the Year. Myra, what do you make of that comparison, and have you been in communication with Abby?
Yeah, so we recently became in contact a couple months ago, a few weeks before trial started. The reason why we became in contact was because of all the similar things between her story and mine. We both were Employee of the Year. We both complained about a few things. And we both, like I got fired, they gave her a hard time at the end before she quit. You know, so there's just a lot of things similar. The reason I'm doing this with her is because I want the employees, you know, to know that if they can come forward, you know, and there's organizations like Abby Johnson, they're ready to help them.
Myra, you poured 17 years of your life into working for Planned Parenthood. Now that you are no longer working there, what do you want people to know about Planned Parenthood's business?
Well, you know, the first thing is that one thing I tell people is that I worked there for 17 years. I didn't see the stuff that I saw when I was moved to an abortion clinic until I was there. You know, before that, I was working in a Title X clinic that they did family planning, birth control, well, woman exams. But the moment I was moved to an abortion clinic, then my perspective and my view about how things were being done was different. You know, that the way I felt was that after 17 years, it's like a blind cover came off of my ears, of my eyes, you know. So I feel a huge deception, you know, and especially when I've been complaining about a specific doctor and the way he practiced, and nothing changes.
Have you stayed in touch with any of your previous colleagues at Planned Parenthood? Are you still in contact with any of them?
Well, unfortunately, due to the trial, the only person that I had a friendship with, we have not been in contact quite a lot because due to the trial, she's not allowed to be in contact with me. It's been hard. I mean, the rest of them, I lost contact with them the moment they knew I submitted a lawsuit. You know, as you heard probably in my story, a lot of them turned their back on me. It was really hard to watch them sit on a chair at the trial and not be truthful. But, you know, I have forgiven them.
Finally, Myra, as our viewers are hearing your story for the first time, and as people around the world are hearing this incredible testimony, what do you want people to know? Well,
what I people to know is that my goal has always been the safety of women. You know, that's where I start complaining. You know, I knew that I could get fired from speaking about the doctor like that, you know, but in my conscience, I couldn't stay quiet. I thought about being my daughter, being my friend's daughters, a relative of mine, you know, a cousin, anybody like from my family going through that situation. I couldn't stay quiet, so I did this so people will hear my story and they will hear what's actually happening. And that, like I said, like if other employees have seen something done wrong, they can come forward and not be afraid.
Mayra Rodriguez, Thank you for your courage and sharing your testimony and for taking the time to be with us.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me. I appreciate it.
When we come back,
And she patted me on the knee and she said, honey, we're not going to teach them how to stop. We're just going to teach them how to do it safer.
a former sexual health educator trained by Planned Parenthood tells us what we need to know about the abortion business's agenda. Stay tuned as EWTN Pro-Life Weekly continues after this break. Welcome back to EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. I'm your host, Catherine Hadro. Another week brings more examples of abortion extremism from Democratic presidential candidates. That is this week's Speak Out segment. At a CNN town hall on climate change last week, Democratic presidential candidate and Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders said he supports population control to curb climate change. And 2 days later, another Democratic candidate, South Bend Mayor Pete Buttigieg, joined the Breakfast Club radio show and used the Bible to justify abortion. Take a listen to both these exchanges.
So I think, especially in poor countries around the world, where women do not necessarily want to have large numbers of babies, and where they can have the opportunity through birth control to control the number of kids they have, something I very, very strongly support.
There's a lot of parts of the Bible that talk about how life begins with breath. And so even that is something that we can interpret differently.
Both of these comments are strikingly reprehensible. Senator Sanders, we are called to be good stewards of all of God's creation. That includes human beings born and unborn, made in the image and likeness of God. Those living in countries experiencing poverty should be supported, not singled out for reduction. Sanders' answer was dangerously close to eugenics language, as he was essentially advocating for America to fund abortion in third world countries. Mayor Buttigieg's remarks were also alarming. Not only was he making pro-abortion comments, but he was, in a perverse and twisted way, attempting to use scripture to back his views. How convenient that he seemed to forget the scripture verses about how God knit us in our mother's womb before our first breath. To even hint that the creator of life would be okay with abortion, the destruction of life, is truly sinister. Instead of standing for the weak and vulnerable, these candidates seem to be racing to outdo each other on abortion extremism. Remember, there is something you can do to counter today's culture of death. Follow this week's call to action. Go to ProLifeWeekly.com to tell your representative to sign the discharge petition on the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act. Finally, we bring you one woman's powerful testimony about why she believes Planned Parenthood is trying to replace the parent. Here is this week's Pro-Life Focus. People who have been on the inside of Planned Parenthood make up some of the most powerful pro-life voices on the outside of the industry.
Oh, there is so much that goes on behind the scenes that the American population just does not know.
We recently sat down for the first time with the former Planned Parenthood insider, Monica Cline.
I not only worked with Planned Parenthood, I worked with any clinic that received Title X funding.
Cline worked in HIV prevention, comprehensive sex education, and Title X training for over a decade. Though never officially employed by Planned Parenthood, she worked closely with them as a former Title X training manager and volunteer educator, and was trained by them on how to reach teenagers, as she recounts to us.
So as soon as they were telling me all of the horror stories of just the cases of young girls coming into the clinics and their situations and physical situations, I said, okay, you've convinced me. What do I need to do to teach these girls not to have sex? And she patted me on the knee and she said, honey, we're not going to teach them how to stop. We're just going to teach them how to do it safer.
Cline utilized her training with teens at schools and after-school programs when she had an unplanned experience herself.
In that time frame, I was not a Christian. I believed everything that I was taught, basically, in comprehensive sex education, and I found myself also having an unplanned pregnancy. My first thought was to have an abortion, because that's pretty much what I was surrounded by. That's what everyone seemed to be doing. And so I called a good friend of mine, and from college, I said, well, I'm pregnant, but I'm going to have an abortion. And she just started to celebrate the life of my child. Then I started thinking, why am I going to kill my child? And that was the first time I realized that what I was about to do.
Cline never went to her abortion appointment, and she gave birth to her son.
When he became a year old, in that time frame, I suffered from depression. I didn't understand what was happening. I had this little baby. I was cohabitating with my boyfriend, and God called me.
Monica Cline believed God was asking her to go to church, so she did and became a Christian. But her leap of faith affected more than just her Sundays.
Once my life started to change, I started to see my work differently.
Cline continued to work in sexual education, but began realizing her clients needed something abortion clinics couldn't offer. They too needed God. And when Cline took on a new volunteer role at Planned Parenthood, her eyes were opened even wider.
What really changed, though, is realizing that at some point Planned Parenthood was admitting to me that they were aware of statutory rape, they were aware of human trafficking, but they didn't consider it statutory rape, and they didn't consider it trafficking, so they were not going to report it. And that was when I realized I didn't belong there, and that I knew I was outside of the will of God.
When she pressed Planned Parenthood on why they were not reporting trafficking cases, Cline just got excuses.
They continued to dismiss me. I said, I do not understand your reaction. Why are you not taking this seriously? And one of the older nurses raised her hand and she said, honey, if she's not with this man this month, she'll be with another one next month. And
she quit in 2009. And today, 10 years later, Cline is boldly exposing Planned Parenthood's sexual education strategy.
When you can dehumanize our children, and you can and take the value and the sacredness out of sex, and you take the sacredness out of life.
The former Planned Parenthood volunteer turned pro-lifer launched her group, It Takes a Family, to directly counter the abortion industry's tactics.
The number one thing that Planned Parenthood always said to me is that parents are a barrier to service. So in other words, anytime a parent finds out that their child is coming to a Planned Parenthood, that parent will stop their child from coming back to the clinic. So the only good parent to a Planned Parenthood is a parent who believes the same ideology that Planned Parenthood believes.
This expert says Planned Parenthood wants to replace the parent when it comes to sexual education, which is why her new goal is to empower parents instead.
Because parents are afraid to talk to their children about sex, or because it feels awkward, or they've come to believe that it's inappropriate to talk to their children about sex, or they just don't know how to do it, they've decided to take a passive stance and not speak at all. So now Planned Parenthood does the speaking, the media does the speaking, their peers do the speaking, and all to the detriment of their children. So what I do is I equip and strengthen parents so that they are their child's primary educator, and that they're the ones that are speaking life into their children instead of someone else.
Thank you, Monica Cline, for sharing your insight with us. And that does it for this edition of EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. Until next time, be sure to reach us at ProLife Weekly at EWTN.com or connect with us on social media. Just search for EWTN Pro-Life on all the major platforms. And remember, life is a gift. Your life is a gift. God bless.